Today, we're digging into a really controversial alternative theory that's popped up around the fictional assassination of political commentator Charlie Kirk. We're going to break down the specific claims that have been made, which, you'll see, paint a picture that's totally different from the official account.
So the official story says it was a single shooter. Simple enough. But a whole community of online investigators started digging, and they claim to have found a trail of anomalies that suggest a much, much deeper plot. So the big question they're asking is this: was it really just one person acting alone? Or do all these strange threads actually point to something else entirely? Let's follow their trail and see where it leads.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll cover the official version of events. Then, we'll dive into these 4 suspicious flights that are really the backbone of this whole theory. After that, we'll trace this wild web of corporate and ideological connections, look at a pretty bizarre digital trail, and finally, we'll pull it all together and look at the big unanswered questions this narrative leaves us with.
All right, so before we get into all the weird stuff, we've got to ground ourselves in the official story. Let's just quickly go over what investigators have publicly confirmed about what happened on September 10th. Okay, so here's the official timeline in a nutshell. At 12:23 p.m., Charlie Kirk is hit by a single shot. The weapon was a bolt-action rifle, and it was fired from a nearby building. Then, just 33 hours later, the police arrest a 22-year-old named Tyler James Robinson and charge him with the murder. That's the story you'll get from the authorities. Okay, so that's where the official story basically ends. And this is where the alternative narrative really begins. According to the source material, the first clues aren't on the ground at all. Nope, they're in the sky, with 4 separate aircraft whose flight patterns on that day have come under some serious scrutiny. The first plane to get flagged is this private jet, tail number N888KG. Now, what's so weird about it? Well, it took off from an airport only about 15 minutes away from the crime scene, and it did so just 1 hour after the shooting. You can see how that timing and location alone would immediately set off some alarm bells for online sleuth. So to get this next part, you have to know what ADS-B is. Real simple, it's kinda like a GPS system for planes. It's constantly broadcasting the aircraft's position, so air traffic control and even public tracking websites can see exactly where it is. It's a standard safety thing on basically all modern planes. And that brings us to one of the biggest claims, that this jet illegally turned off its transponder to go dark for an hour. Now, it is crucial to point out the official explanation from the Department of Transportation. They said, look, this wasn't some sneaky move. It was just a pre-agreed cancellation of radar services with air traffic control. And they insist the transponder itself was never actually switched off. Okay, on to the second plane. And this one adds a whole new military layer to the story. An aircraft with the call sign Axel 10, which was identified as a U.S. Army spy plane, you know, the kind they use for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, was also flying around near the university on that very same day. Now, what made this plane's presence so weird was its flight path. I mean, these spy planes, they typically fly way, way up there, like 30 to 50,000 feet. But on September 10th, Axel 10 made 2 passes near the campus at just 210 feet. I mean, that is incredibly low. It did it once a few hours before the shooting, and then again just 25 minutes after. And finally, as if that wasn't enough, we get to these 2 Egyptian government jets. Just their presence was odd. One of them was parked in Provo for 4 months. The other did what experts called a mapping run. And get this, both of them made a stop at Minot Air Force Base, which is a super-sensitive U.S. nuclear command center. Then, on the morning of the shooting, after months of being electronically silent, one of the jets starts sending out these ground pings from the airport. So, okay, we've got 4 pretty distinct, pretty weird things happening in the sky. But strange flight paths by themselves don't prove anything, right? Well, the next part of this whole narrative tries to connect those dots, building this web that starts with that first private jet and stretches all the way to international politics. All right, follow the money, right? The theory lays out this chain of ownership. The jet's owner is a guy named Derek Maxfield. He sold his company, Unique, to Cody Incorporated. Cody was owned by a company called JAB Holding, which is owned by Germany's Reimann family. The source material makes a point of highlighting that this family has acknowledged its historical ties to the Nazi Party, and to atone for that past, they started the Alfred Landecker Foundation, which is described as being very strongly pro-Israel. So the narrative then tries to draw this ideological line connecting them.
It points out that the Ryman family's foundation is, explicitly pro-Israel, and it also describes Derek Maxfield's Mormon faith as being Zionist in its theology. This idea of a shared ideology is presented as a really key connection in the whole theory.
And this all leads to what theorists are pointing to as a possible motive. In May of 2025, just a few months before he was killed, Charlie Kirk wrote this public letter to the Israeli Prime Minister. In it, he was basically warning him that support for Israel was starting to dry up, even among his own conservative followers. The theory suggests that this letter, this signal that Kirk's politics were shifting, might have made him a target for certain pro-Israel interests.
Now, this next part, this is what the source material describes as maybe the single most disturbing piece of this whole puzzle. We're talking about a digital trail of incredibly specific Google searches that apparently happened before the assassination ever became public knowledge.
So just so this next slide makes sense, let's do a quick crash course on Google Trends. It basically measures how popular a search term is on a scale from 0 to 100. A score of 100 means that's the absolute peak interest for that term in that place at that time. A score of 100 isn't just a little bump, it's a massive spike.
Okay. Now, look at what this data allegedly shows. Key terms, really specific terms related to the assassination, hit that peak search interest score of 100, weeks before the event even happened. The alleged shooter's name, reportedly trending in Israel and D.C., the name of the attorney he would later get, also trending in Israel. And get this, even the specific street address where the rifle was eventually found was supposedly a top search in Israel and Huntsville, Alabama, almost a month before.
So, what are we supposed to do with all that? When you put the weird planes, the financial links, the supposed motive, and that frankly unbelievable digital trail all side by side, this alternative narrative leaves you with some pretty profound and totally unanswered questions.
The whole narrative is really asking us to consider all these threads together. Why were there 4 different aircraft all acting so strangely in the same area on the same day? How on earth could non-public details, like the shooter's name or where the weapon was, be top Google searches before the crime was even committed? And what are we supposed to make of the connections between the jet owner, his corporate partners, and Kirk's changing political views?
And then there's one last little piece to this puzzle. An analysis of footage from the scene supposedly identified 4 unidentified drones just flying around at the time of the shooting. And some people who subscribe to this theory connect those drones right back to that military spy plane, Axel 10, which they claim had been modified to carry and deploy drones.
So, in the end, this alternative narrative presents this collection of data points, from flight paths to Google searches, that it claims are just too specific, and there are too many of them to all be a coincidence. It leaves us with this one central question. Are these all just a series of unrelated, bizarre events? Or do they, as the theory claims, actually fit together to paint a far more complex and far more coordinated picture?